Hello again. It's nice to see people looking fresher. I also feel a little bit fresher today. And especially warm welcome to the people who are joining today for the first time. Hopefully you'll be staying for the next couple of days. So yesterday I gave an introduction to the theme of this retreat, just explaining where the idea of the three right intentions comes into the Buddha's teaching as a wise way of relating not only to other people in our life, but also to our own minds. And there's many places where the Buddha talks about this. One is at the second factor of the Eightfold Noble Path as right intention. And another place is in the Dveda Vitakka Sutta, which is Majjhima Nikaya, for anyone who's interested. And he talks about the right intentions as three kinds of right thought, ways of thinking. And in a nutshell, he's saying, let's choose compassion and non-harm over cruelty and harm. Yeah. Choose renunciation and letting go over sense desire and amassing more and more material and mental goods or bads. And choose loving kindness over aversion. And the Buddha's saying that if we do this, then obstacles to wisdom will be removed, difficulties will be overcome, and will incline ever more surely towards Nibbana. So he's showing us a different direction to look for happiness than the usual way in the world. Yeah. And if you think about all spiritual traditions, wise people are usually those people who are able to let go of things, who live a simple life, yeah, who don't amass excessive amount of material goods or, increase the exploitation of the world, of the environment, which is really an issue these days. It's come to the point where we are pillaging resources. And, there's some huge environmental catastrophes happening right now. Even this morning I read about the fires in, I think in Victoria now in Australia. And people are literally having to get on their boats and take refuge on the ocean because the air is so bad, going from black with smoke to red from the fire. So, these are all outcomes of human greed and selfishness, and the Buddha's saying let's move in the opposite direction towards simplifying, becoming contented with what we've got. And in the gradual training, this is actually the stage after developing virtue. So first we establish ourselves in virtuous conduct, and a result of that should be moving towards simplicity. And I think one reason is because there's already a lot of happiness to be gained, inner happiness to be gained from living a virtuous life. And when we have that sense of satisfaction within ourselves, that we're living a life aligned to our values, that we're doing good in this world, or at least we're not perpetuating harmful behaviours, to the best of our ability, then there's a sense of happiness, a sense of, it's more than self-esteem, it's something that you just feel good about your life. Your life has meaning, which is beyond your own. And the result of that is we don't need to rely so much on material possessions and, amassing money and property. And it's always funny to see that the people with the biggest properties also often have the biggest gates in front of their houses, with all the padlocks. And sometimes the more we depend on these things, the more afraid we are of losing them. And I know for myself, I left England quite at a young age. I was about 18 and I started to travel. And I went to India. I think I mentioned this yesterday. I had £200 in traveller's checks and a ticket to India and on to Thailand, but no return ticket at all. And I just knew that I had to find something. I wasn't quite sure what, but I felt very frustrated with, what I could see around me, which was basically an option to get different kinds of jobs, different kinds of possible ways of living, but all in a materialistic capitalist society. And that just didn't seem to have enough meaning for me. I felt that there must be something more. Perhaps also because I'd been a little bit depressed in my teens. I think a lot of people, maybe it's hormonal, but we tend to have this sort of existential crisis, like, why am I actually here? Okay, so I can choose to study English or psychology or art, but fine, but why am I here, And this was a really strong, burning question for me. So I left and went to India. And of course, I probably worried my mum no end, I guess I also knew that she'd probably bail me out if I needed to come home. But I really had sort of so much freedom ahead of me, and obviously very few resources to live on. So I had to live a simple life. And there was such a freedom in that. I'd always go to little restaurants and have to look for the cheapest thing on the menu, or go for the most kind of run-down guest houses that I could find that were the cheap ones. And there was a kind of sense of confidence that grew from that I was okay wherever I went, and there was this sort of certainty and sense of freedom in knowing that I could survive and even thrive in those conditions. And then I started to practice meditation, and I gave my whole life to that and to the practice of sitting on retreats and then serving on retreats. And there was such a sense of inner satisfaction that slowly, all my sort of, even some of the things I enjoyed in the sensual world, you could say, started to drop away. And not because I was condemning them in any way. I mean, I had a great love of rock music and had taken hours to compile all these little cassettes with all my favourite Led Zeppelin songs on them. But after a while, I just preferred the sounds of the local people, the goats, the chickens on the buses, and just being more present in the moment. So there was this sense of inner stability and ease and contentment, which was in a way much more pleasurable than these pleasures of the senses. Yeah. And even in India, we used to hear about other so-called spiritual teachers, and something sounded wrong, when you heard about these teachers having a fleet of Rolls Royce and all these disciples with lots of money and sort of beauty parlours in the ashram, and it just sounded something was a bit off there, because surely the spiritual path will lead us to finding more happiness within ourselves, and as a consequence, not needing to take more than is due to us and harm other people. So that was my first sort of experience with renunciation, and it was so, in a way, strengthening and giving of confidence that I felt like I wanted to keep on taking steps. Because contrary to the bad press that the word renunciation has, I actually found that the less I had, the more that cultivated a sense of contentment with what I did have. And even now, with my little monastery in Oxford, we're not very well supported at the moment. I mean, sometimes people come to offer dana, to offer lunch at the residence, but most of the time I depend on my guests who stay with me to do some cooking. And so there is a very real sense of not knowing whether I'll get a meal or whether the meal will be suitable for my strange stomach. And that means that when people do come and offer food, there's a huge sense of gratitude and almost like amazement that it is working. And that time and again, more than my needs are met. I actually have them, met beyond any expectation. And this is one of the beauties of lowering our expectations, and living at kind of alongside our means, not above our means, maybe under it. Ajahn Brahm always says you should live at no better standard than the poorest of your supporters, which I think is very beautiful, because we have to be an example, especially as monastics. So there's something very powerful about monastic life, but also in the world, how much do we really need, and how much extra time is spent on trying to acquire things which maybe don't lead to any deeper sense of happiness. Yeah. So this sense of renunciation, I would also like to call it letting go. Contentment, giving, the opposite of accumulating, the opposite of sense desire. And also it's very close to love, because love is what frees, love is what lets things go. If you really love somebody, you can let them go. If they're happier somewhere else or with somebody else, if it's true love, you can let them go with your best wishes. I mean, it's a high state of love, and most love in the world is not as pure as that. But I have experienced, the kind of love, at least from my teacher, from good friends, who I know their only wish for me is that I'm free from my suffering, and they don't have any other expectation, Especially my teacher, he actually always says his job is to get rid of disciples, not to get more disciples, because he's got too many anyway. So, he'd be very happy if I'd probably never call him again, although when I call him, he gives me a lot of time and a lot of support. But I know that he needs nothing at all from me, because he's found inner contentment. And that's the way the path should be going, So renunciation, letting go, is something that frees the heart and leads us to look in a different direction for happiness. Yeah. So in the Arana Vibhanga Sutta, it's another lovely sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, in case anyone's interested, it's on the tape. The Buddha talks about the pursuit of happiness. And I think often in Buddhist circles we're not quite sure how much happiness we should be getting from our meditation, if it's really allowed or not. Yeah, because we might get attached, or perhaps, we should just be economists with everything that comes up in our practice. And that's true, that's a sense of open awareness, loving kindness, meeting things with compassion. But the Buddha also said that one should know happiness and how to define it, and knowing that, one should pursue the happiness within oneself. Yeah, and he put this as a juxtaposed against the two extreme ways of seeking happiness. So you might have all heard of the middle path, the middle path in Buddhism. So the two extremes that the Buddha discovered when he became enlightened were the extreme of sensual desire or craving for sensual desire, rolling in it, if you like. And he said that kind of happiness is ignoble, unbeneficial, and doesn't lead to enlightenment. So it wasn't really a judgment, it was more a sense that this is what you can expect. It has its pleasure, it has its gratification, but there's also a danger to that. And the main danger is, obviously, if it doesn't lead to enlightenment, that's a danger. But the other thing is that you can become dependent on things which basically aren't really going anywhere. It's okay to enjoy simple things, like enjoy the chocolate biscuits. I can't because I'm on sugar-free. But, enjoy what's there, but don't look for a lasting source of happiness there, because it won't be. Yeah. And there's also this thing called the law of diminishing returns, where something that once gave you a lot of pleasure ceases to give the same amount the more you use it. So if you take like 10 chocolate biscuits, you'll start to actually feel the opposite of happiness and pleasure, and probably be running to the bathroom, or just on a sugar high and then a big drop at the end of it. So this is the problem. I once said to my parents, because they love to go on cruises at the moment, and fair enough, because my dad has leukemia, and we don't know how long he has prostate cancer too, but they can't really operate because of his leukemia medication, which means that the blood doesn't clot properly. So they're trying to make the best of it in the way they can, and they go on these cruises. But I don't know if my mum appreciated it, but I once said, well, if you had such a good time on the cruise, then you won't need to go again. And she's like, huh? She's like, how is the logic there? She always thinks my logic's a bit off. So I said, well, if that was really satisfying, that would be enough, wouldn't it? But anyway, it didn't land very well, so they're going again. But, I have noticed that each cruise is a little bit more luxurious, a little bit more exotic, and this is the thing, what used to please us and stimulate the senses no longer works in quite the same way. So we have to look for ever more, enticing journeys or like hits. There's all those adrenaline junkies who do extreme sports, such as jumping off the top of buildings, and apparently 50% of them actually don't get their parachute up in time or something like that. Because we're so much looking for this hit of happiness through the senses. And the Buddha says this is actually one of the extremes, not to be pursued, but to be avoided, And then the other extreme that he discussed was the extreme of what is often translated as torture, like torturing or tormenting the body and mind. But the literal translation is the practices that weary and tire the body and mind. And I find this interesting because sometimes we don't, we think that we're free from that particular extreme because we're not actually engaged in torture, or beating ourselves up, I hope. Sometimes we mentally do. But it means any kind of practice that tires and wearies the mind. So it could mean overworking. I'm guilty of that sometimes. I stay up very late because there's a lot of work involved in running a project like this and getting it going, And that's a practice that definitely tires my mind and doesn't lead to nibbana. It's the wrong kind of happiness. But of course there is a sense that will lead somewhere. There is a sense that will lead to happiness. Otherwise we wouldn't work so hard, right? So we neglect ourselves. We don't care for ourselves. Yeah. Even when you're on a meditation retreat, If you're meditating just non-stop and starting to hurt your body, and actually getting more weary, more tight than when you came, it can happen. You actually leave feeling more uptight because it hasn't been a relaxing experience. This is also one of the extremes. Yeah? So the Buddha said that there's a different way. And what I think, again, can be a miscomprehension is that some people think the middle way is somewhere in between. But to me, somewhere in between would be a very bland kind of uninspiring kind of happiness. Not a lot of passion involved in that, But actually, the Buddha's saying it's not in between those two, it's in a totally different direction. Yeah, because both of these two are involved in the sense world. They're about seeking happiness somehow, or even, through torturing the senses. The Buddha's saying that the middle way he discovered was in the opposite direction, through the mind. So away from the five sense world, yeah? Sight, sound, smell, taste, pleasant touch. Yeah, but happiness that comes from within. And he described that as the happiness of renunciation, nekkhamma sukha, and the happiness of peace, the happiness of letting go, the happiness of liberation. Yeah? Oh, and the happiness of seclusion, paviveka sukha. It means when you're secluded from the five sense world. So you start to look inside for that happiness. And as I said, this begins with practicing virtue. We have this inner sense of, like you could call it non-remorse, but there is actually a happiness there that we sometimes don't notice. We only notice things that are very obvious and very sort of coarse in a way. But there's a happiness in simply not having regret and remorse, like feeling that you live a valuable, harmless life. There's a sense of uprightness. Yeah? So we have to start noticing this, and then at a deeper level we start to learn how to use our mind in ways that generates wholesome states. So this is the realm of sense restraint, but it really means learning to look at people, situations, one's own mind in a positive way. Yeah? Ajahn Brahm sometimes calls it watering the flowers and not the weeds. So instead of always looking for the faults or noticing the faults in others and in oneself, we look for the strengths, we look for the positives. We try to reinterpret other people's behaviour in a really good light. Or even just letting them off the hook, like, okay, so they did say something that seemed quite rude and abrupt, but probably they must have been tired, maybe they were suffering, going through a difficult time. So we look at things in a way that helps our own mind regain some happiness and some strength, rather than in a way that depletes and just increases irritation, frustration, aversion. Yeah? So this is sense restraint. And then at a deeper level, the Buddha's saying that the deeper happiness is the happiness of the jhanas, which are the deep states of samadhi. So all these things are a kind of gradual training towards that. But the deeper happiness that he meant by the middle way is actually the four jhanas. Yeah? And this is often not made explicitly clear, I think, in Buddhist circles. And he said that kind of happiness, the happiness of renunciation, seclusion, peace, as in peace of these deep states of samadhi, he compared that to the happiness of enlightenment, because the bliss is so strong in those states. And you can experience this well before getting into really deep samadhi. There are increasingly subtle, maybe not so obvious blisses, but there is a lot of happiness to be had, even just from living a virtuous life. Yeah? And then when we get into the meditation, we start to notice subtler happinesses of the mind. Even the happiness of just being able to observe a breath and stay with that breath, without tension, without holding it. Yeah? As though the mind was smiling at the breath and just appreciating this little delicate creature that's come to see you. Instead of trying to grasp at it, we give to the breath. We just give all our love, all our attention, our time to one little breath. And there's a lot of peace and joy to be found in that. Of course, when expectation comes in, like, now I need to be with the next breath and the next breath, and when's jhana coming? Then we blow the whole thing, because that's not letting go. Yeah. This is a process of letting go, not attaining things. So there's a danger sometimes when teachers start to talk about deep states of meditation, because we feel like we should get these states, we should attain them. There's somebody in here that wants that. But this is actually an obstacle. That's another kind of desire, another kind of craving. Yeah? because this process is a process of letting go and becoming more and more content with whatever's arising now. So the direction that we look in is inward, not onward. Yeah? Inward to what's happening now, not onward to the next stage or onward to the next breath. Even within one breath, you can be going to the next one. Yeah? Each breath is comprised of many, many moments. So the more the mind starts to calm and still and let go of other distractions and diversity, the more we can really appreciate the pleasure, the simple pleasure just in one moment of breath, or one, even sensations in the body. Yesterday we were working a lot with generating an attitude of kindness towards the body. You could call it respect or even gratitude, warmth. And I don't know if anyone here experienced kind of tingling sensations or just like very subtle relaxation when you meet those sensations with kindness. The body tends to respond. It feels like, at last someone sort of took the care to have a look at how I'm feeling. Yeah. This morning, Lucy very kindly, I don't know where she is, did a little bit of Alexander technique with me for my spine, which I've somehow mentally compartmentalized into various parts. And she was talking about learning to go with the spine and the movements of the spine as nature intended, and just to really listen in and to see how I'm moving, and how basically there's a lot of doing. We're controlling our movement so much instead of letting nature take the lead, because the spine is one continuous piece, and I'm sure it's more than just that too, energetically. Anyway, I haven't got so much knowledge about that yet, but it was just really interesting to see that this was a part of my body and a part of movement that I'd never really explored. And I could feel my whole body just really enjoyed that. And there was very little, there was no manipulation actually, but there were 3 little during like 10 minutes. And Lucy said, it's like you're your own chiropractor. And the body just did that on its own. I had no control. I didn't, I think if I would have got involved more, it wouldn't have worked. And it's the same with our meditation. Yeah? We think we have to do it and we have to get somewhere, and but often that's just coming from the ways that we operate in the world. Yeah? Too much striving, too much wanting, spiritual materialism. Yeah. So this process is a natural process. It's almost like surrendering to a process, to nature, to the Dhamma. Yeah. I love that word, surrender. It's very Christian, but when I meditate, sometimes I just imagine that the breath is there just to guide me gently into meditation, and I just give my trust to the breath. Yeah. Not to a figure like a Godhead or anything like this, but just give trust to the process, give trust to the breath. It's like offering yourself to the breath instead of, the opposite way around where we're always in control. Yeah. So this leads gradually towards the deep meditation. Yeah. But we have to first learn to let go of the lesser pleasures. And it does happen as a natural process. Again, we don't have to sort of wean ourselves off things that we enjoy. That will happen naturally. But there's a very nice little story about a monkey who... it was actually a trap, and I don't know where they did these traps, but they have these traps where they sort of pin a coconut shell to the ground, and they make a little hole in it, and it's just big enough for the monkey to get his hand in the coconut. And there's a banana in there, right? So that's why the monkey puts his hand in, to take the banana. But once it has hold of this banana, it doesn't want to let go, and so it gets trapped. It's trying so hard to get its hand out in this little hole that's now too small. And it can't do it. And it waits, and then eventually the hunter comes, and it still can't let go of this banana. And this is the problem sometimes. We're like little children who don't want to let go of our toys. But somehow we sometimes have to put something down to make a space for something else to arise. Yeah. So it's like in our meditation, we start to meditate. We need to first come into the body, put away the mental proliferation, the memories, what we've just been doing, the journey on the bus when we're stuck in traffic, whatever it is, put that down and just come into the body, come into the moment. Yeah? And then we try to put the past and future down. You can pick it up again later. This word attachment in Buddhism is actually another really bad translation, because the word is actually upadana. Upadana, I think. Is it Upadana? Anyway, it means dana is like giving, and adana is taking. Up means up. So it's like uptake, taking something up. That's a much better translation of upadana than attachment. It literally means picking something up, taking something up. So the opposite is not detachment, right? I always had an issue with this word detachment. It sounds really aloof and kind of a bit superior, a bit cold. Like I'm done with that, I'm done with you, I don't need that anymore. And very final somehow, this word detachment. But if you think that, upadana actually means picking up, then the opposite would be putting down. So we can pick things up and put them down time and again, And you can tell your mind when you go into the meditation, mind, I'm just going to put down the past and future for now. It'll be there afterwards. You can pick it up again afterwards, yeah? We're not actually leaving it for good. We're not trying to forget whatever happened in our lives. There's still something to learn from that. But we learn how to pick things up when we need them and put them down when they're not useful to us anymore. And of course we have to learn what is useful to pick up and what we should put down. So we put down the happinesses that don't really lead anywhere, and we take up the happinesses of meditation. Yeah? And we can actually cultivate those happinesses just by noticing them. Sometimes it's just a matter of allowing them into your awareness. Yeah? Even just suggesting. I remember I was on retreat 2014 on the Rains retreat, which are my nice 3-month periods to get into meditation. And I was meditating and things were quite peaceful, but nothing special, a little bit even boring. Nothing much was happening. I was with the breath, okay, whatever. Not totally still. And then I remembered this instruction from my teacher, notice bliss. Or it might have been notice delight, something like that. And it just popped into my head like some instructions do. You don't kind of do the instruction, but they can just come up at the right time sometimes. And my mind just looked for the happiness, almost automatically. And it just grew. It just almost took over instantaneously. And all this happiness of peace and the happiness of contentment. It's a very different flavour from the happiness of the senses. Even the word happiness is sometimes a bit misleading, because I actually feel it's more a contentment, it's a settling, a stilling, a sense of deep contentment. But it had a feeling of enormous release, enormous bliss, I would say, mental bliss, that was different from the kind of physical bliss that we get from the 5 sense realm. So that was really lovely. And it's encouraged, to look for that and to look for even things like the silence in meditation. There's a lot of chatter, especially if, we've been busy in our lives so far and we don't have a lot of time to meditate. But there's also a lot of gaps between the chatter, Sometimes you can have a sense of there might not even be many gaps between the words, but there's a sort of background of stillness. There's a background of silence. Some people call it the sound of silence. There's like a that's kind of a big container, and all this mental chatter can happen within that. So you don't have to focus on the content of the mind. You can sometimes focus on the empty spaces, and that's a letting go. That's a renunciation. Renouncing thought, renouncing giving it importance, because whatever we give importance tends to flourish in our mind, in our thoughts. So if we give attention to different things, they start to grow. This is what is meant by watering the flowers and not the weeds. It's not that you have to go and rip the weeds out and, generate hostility towards them, because they're part of nature too, but you don't need to always focus on them. Sometimes you can focus on fertilizing the good aspects of the mind, feeding those instead. So the Buddha also talked about the third noble truth, 4 ways of letting go, which I think is important to just mention at this point, because this is another place where he's talking about a kind of renunciation of craving. And the 4 ways of letting go, he said, are the way out of suffering, the way to happiness, the way to liberation. And the first one of those is called chaga, which means giving or giving up, giving away. Yeah? And this is a really beautiful movement of the mind, which is very close to a sense of generosity. So yesterday we talked a little bit about dana, about donations, generosity, and how that is in alignment with the whole movement of the Buddhist path. And that's because it's a kind of giving, yeah? So we're seeing that there's something beyond ourselves. It really expands this narrow sense of self where we feel lacking in something and in need of something. Instead, it connects us to a sense of abundance, that we have something we can offer. Yeah? And we can bring this up in our meditation. We can give to the breath. We can actually give it all our attention, our kindness, our love, our gentleness, yeah? Or whatever else you take as your meditation object. And then the next one is mutti, which literally means freeing, yeah? Freedom or freeing. And as I said, it's an aspect of love. Love frees. It gives things space. It's the opposite of these horrible zoos that you can go to where you see all these beautiful animals caged up without any ability to be free and have space, to roam as they need to do, as they would in the nature. So love frees things and lets them go. The Buddha says that a monastic should live like a bird with its wings, its only burden, free just to wander. Yeah? And in the Buddhist tradition we have this thing called tudong, which means literally just going into the forest. Sometimes in Thailand the monks used to do that for a whole year. They'd just take with them their robe and bowl and maybe a clod, which is like a mosquito net that they would put over themselves in the night to meditate. And they'd just go, wandering through the country, taking food wherever they were offered in any village. Of course, for nuns it's much more difficult because it's not set up for that, and people usually think, shouldn't you be at home getting support from your family? Unfortunately. But it is an aspect of monastic life that I think is really valuable. So this is a kind of freeing yourself from all those burdens, the heavy backpacks and all your luggage and the things you don't really need to take with you. Yeah. And then the other one was patinissaga, which literally means throwing things away. And again, it isn't with any sort of ill will or animosity, like, I don't need you, I'm putting you down. It's more about lightening your load. So a lovely simile that my teacher uses is like you're in a hot air balloon and you want to fly, you want to go up in this air balloon, but you've got loads of ballast in there, too much junk, basically. So you throw things out so that you can go higher, that you feel lighter. And as you do this, you increasingly get more and more beautiful views as well. Yeah? So this is like the process again of calming the mind, lightening it, throwing the things out that you don't really need. Even the, maladaptive thought patterns of the inner tyrant, you don't need them anymore. Yeah. They develop sort of through conditioning and maybe in an attempt to protect you or to help you in some way. But actually we've mostly outgrown those now and they don't serve us anymore. So when we can identify those voices and we realise, okay, this is not leading to my good, and there's a danger in thinking this way. It's leading me to basically tie myself in knots and become more and more upset. And there's a danger that I start believing in those thoughts. And even just the danger in the fact that you're not enjoying the silence of the mind at that moment, right? So we see that danger and we throw it out. So we throw these things out of the balloon and we just float higher and higher. And in his little simile, because he likes to talk about the deep stuff, he says, at some point, you've gone so high that you can't get any higher. You even throw the basket out. And then finally, guess what? You even throw yourself out. So eventually, even this sense of I, needing to go higher is an obstacle. Yeah. In deep meditation, usually it's always this sense of self that's very subtle, but just comes in at the last sort of junction before jhana, like, oh, what's going on now? Or, oh, this is nice. It can be even pre-verbal, and it is pre-verbal at that point, but it's just the sense that you have to be involved, And as long as there's an I that has to be involved, we haven't fully let go. Yeah. So this prevents us going higher. And then the last one of the four ways of letting go is analio, which means, like alia means like abode. So Himalaya means abode of snow. So analia means no abode, literally, right? No roosting, no place to rest. And what it really means is that we don't keep things in our mind. So again, Ajahn Brahm calls it the non-stick mind or the Teflon mind, which is really nice. So things come, but we let them go. Yeah. One of the things that I think most people, including myself, I guess, find difficult is when other people speak to us in ways that are really upsetting. Yeah, criticism or just ways that hurt us. They trigger some sort of childhood pain or whatever. And the Buddha talks about that, and he says, when other people address you, it may be timely or untimely, true or untrue, beneficial or unbeneficial. But the attitude you should have at that time is to remain like the earth and to generate compassion for that person. And then he says, even starting with that person, start developing loving kindness towards the whole world, beginning with that person who's hurt you. So the idea is to remain patient in the face of criticism, yeah? And to just generate compassion that person must be suffering in order to speak that way, yeah? And this is part of nature. I love when he sort of classifies things this way, that speech may be timely or untimely, beneficial or unbeneficial, because everything will come in one of those categories, and then you realise, okay, so this is a pattern. It's a pattern of behaviour. We all do it, right? It's a kind of checklist that can be quite helpful. And it's to be expected. Yeah? Praise and blame is part of life. Ajahn Chah had a nice little simile. He said, if somebody calls you a dog, just have a look and see if you've got a tail. If you've not got a tail, you're not a dog. Problem finished. So that's really nice. And another one I like, which I'm trying to work on, is to be like a dustbin. So especially if you're in a care role, right, or in a role like I am, where I'm sort of, I guess by default you end up doing quite a lot of personal counselling, even without being a qualified counsellor. You're in that role a lot because people come and stay with me, and of course they want to share their life, share the difficulties they experience in an attempt to have some kind of guidance, right? Or even just process things. And so you end up receiving a lot, yeah? And Ajahn Brahm always says, I sort of say to him sometimes, shouldn't I don't know, it feels like I'm giving too much. And he said, no, it's fine, you can give. But when you take all this in, remember that you have to have a dustbin with a bottom, without a bottom, yeah? The bottomless dustbin. So it goes in, but it goes out. And I was practicing this a bit at Gaia House because I was doing some of the resident teacher work there for a couple of months as a fill-in for the resident teacher who's normally taking care of personal retreatants. And you'd have sort of 20-minute interviews, one after the other, maybe 6 or 7 a day, which is quite a lot because people, it's a very intimate setting. And I was quite touched by the extent people revealed, how much of themselves they revealed. And I realised that, first of all, the most useful thing I could do was just offer presence, just listen, and try to put, again, warmth, kindness, non-judgment in that space between me, the observer, and them, the person in front of me, yeah? This space between the knower and the known, or the knowing, because there's no real person there. So it's like there's this space between us, and if I just fill that with kindness, that is the healing. That is the biggest part of the healing, actually. And then the other thing that I found really helpful was just to stay connected to my body. Yeah, just to really stay grounded and present in myself. And that gave a kind of continuity that I wasn't getting too pulled into everybody else's stuff. I was very present, but I was also listening in, so that when that person left, I would have a couple of moments with myself, again recenter, and again be there for the other. So this was very lovely, and it was a kind of way of having, a non-stick mind, being able to receive but let things go. And this is the kind of passive approach we want to take in our practice. Yeah, we try to put the causes in place for meditation, and again, that's the right attitude. So the attitudes of loving kindness, of compassion, and of letting go. So yesterday we started with compassion, and the reason for that was that it's important to be able to meet your own emotional pain, physical pain, to meet suffering before we attempt to let it go. Yeah. Because we have to first understand suffering, how it's caused, where it comes from, how we're perpetuating it, yeah, or what leads to its diminishing also, yeah, what pacifies suffering. So we have to understand it first of all, and when we meet that suffering with compassion in hand, we take along the kindness with the mindfulness, then it helps us to stay with it for longer. It helps us to undermine the hindrances to bear awareness, yeah? And it develops a very healthy relationship with whatever arises in the body and mind. So this is also a theme of the day, and I would definitely recommend continuing with that kind awareness. So, because mindfulness is never meant to be separate from these three right intentions, beautiful attitudes, right? It always goes hand in hand. But now we've met some of that. Today I just wanted to focus a bit more on letting things go. So noticing what are our friends, what are our enemies, noticing what kind of happiness we should pursue, what kind of happiness we maybe can let go of. Yeah? Even thoughts about that, thoughts of sensuality or thoughts of ill will. Just learning to put them down for a while and to follow this scent of freedom, the taste of enlightenment. And you can know you're on the right path when peace increases, when contentment deepens, or when understanding arises. Yeah? The Buddha said this is the Dhamma in brief. Whatever leads to understanding, contentment, peace, enlightenment, you can know for sure that's the Dhamma. Yeah? So, I think it's time for some meditation. So, if anyone would like a quick stretch, otherwise we'll get straight into it.